In 1998, the greatest Zelda game of all time was released. Yeah, I said it. The greatest. Okay, I'll take that back. The second greatest. Because, you know, another masterpiece exists. But seriously, objectively speaking, this game's the greatest. I have a history with Zelda games, but even as a kid, I was a little bamboozled. I used to think that the Wind Waker was the best Zelda game, and now I just think to myself, are you f***ing kidding me? We'll get to that game in a bit, but honestly, I'm starting to believe that Wind Waker is a psyop because of its graphics. So because you have this cool cel-shaded graphics, it's just the best? Because it definitely doesn't have the dungeons, it definitely doesn't have the story, and it definitely doesn't have the... Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to why Ocarina of Time is not overrated. Okay, before I continue and before you switch to attack position in the comments, I want to preface that this isn't nostalgia, I promise. I completed Ocarina for the first time a little under 6 years ago and I loved it. Before that, I hated it. I always had it as a kid, but I neglected playing it because I just thought it wasn't as cool as Twilight Princess or the Wind Waker. Boy was I wrong. I thought that sailing the seas is what Zelda was, being free and the world being as open as it was. I thought that being all linear and grand as Twilight Princess was the answer as well, but truthfully, it's both. You know, I always hated that argument. You know which one I'm talking about.
Well, these games have to be better because they fixed everything that Ocarina of Time did wrong.
Listen, buddy, you do realize that that argument you're making is the reason why they can't be better? Literally. It's unfair to make that argument because those games had the time to iron out all of the issues of its predecessors, while Ocarina had to put out a complete product on objectively worse hardware in the wake of 3D graphics, in the wake of open world action games in 1998. So, of course, no shit they were gonna get things wrong. But the key understanding is that those things weren't wrong back then. You have to look at what these games do in their respective times. Was Twilight just as monumental as Ocarina was in its respective times? No. Was Wind Waker just as monumental as Ocarina was in their respective times? No. Was Breath of the Wild just as monumental as Ocarina in its respective times? Probably, but arguably? No. If you start using that argument, things seem a lot more clear. But I'm not done yet. We gotta talk about something called quintessentials. I was gonna say quintessentialism, but I'm not sure if that's a word. But whatever, quintessentialism. Zelda games got this thing called Ocarina of Time is a quintessential Zelda game. It did everything right in its first go. Sure, it had Link to the Past to back it up, but it still did everything right. And both of those games can exist on their own. Honestly, Majora's Mask can exist on its own too. Why? Because it did something entirely different from the formula and did it arguably better. Whereas Wind Waker and Twilight don't really do anything better than how Ocarina of Time originally did it. Unless it's from a technical standpoint. The dungeons in Ocarina are much better than the dungeons in Wind Waker, and the story in Ocarina is much better than the story in Twilight. Granted, Twilight is basically Ocarina though. It's the same premise, but just, you know, it's a little worse. Matter of fact, let me put it this way. Zelda as a series has had a fixed set of foundations, and there's a checklist of things that you have to do absolutely right. And some games just don't check off everything. Ocarina just so happens to check off more things than said games, which is why it's so regarded. I don't give a damn about your,
Well, the graphics,
or the,
well, the controls are weird.
I don't care.
Shut the fuck up!
It's 1998.
You sound dumb. You sound stupid.
At the end of the day, the argument comes down to these games and understanding that they literally can't be better than Ocarina. They literally can't. Subjectively, it could be your favorite, sure, but from a critiquing standpoint, it has to be a 99. So quit complaining about Ocarina being a 99 on Metacritic. No game is ever going to beat that. Unless... Jokes aside, I love every single Zelda game.